Okay, we've got our panelists located. We can start. Um, Welcome to everybody. My name is Fabio Parasecoli. I'm associate professor here at the New School and the coordinator in the Food Studies program. I want to welcome you to this afternoon's panel on the regionally grown grains, which we host together with Greenmarket, the program of Grow NYC, and then we'll hear more about that, of course. But the work to bring fresh and local food to the city has been amazing. I think now you have 51 markets, right, in the 5 boroughs, which is great, just great. And I think it's an interesting theme. I mean, besides the fact that more and more people are interested in local food, fresh food, and healthy food, grain in particular in the past 2-3 years have become extremely relevant, both at the local and at the global level, for the whole problem of the grain crisis and whatnot. So there is a lot of attention to the topic. And that's exactly the kind of themes we like to explore here at the Food Studies program at the New School. And let me give you a few information about that very briefly. I won't hold you very long.
Can you turn the volume by any chance?
I don't know how to do that. Can you turn up the volume? They're asking. Better? Okay.
Thanks.
All right, no problem. So the Food Studies program started in 2008 with a few classes, and it's growing, and we want to keep on growing. So we're adding a few classes every semester, and we hope in a couple of years to have a full program. It's at the undergraduate level, and we offer classes that range from food history to food policy to media and communication, everything that can be interesting for students and that deal with food. Also, if you're interested, I mean, probably the best way is to sign up, leave your email address, and we can send the information. Besides the classes that are open to the students, we also organize events like tonight, and that's an important part of what we do, because the New School mission is actually outreach to the community. As a matter of fact, also all our classes are open for non-matriculated students. So if anybody's interested in any kind of classes, you're more than welcome to join us. In the meanwhile, let me introduce Jean Hodesh here. She's the publicity coordinator of the Greenmarket, and she'll explain to us their project for the Grains Week. Thank you.
Thank you for coming tonight and joining us. So this is the third event in what we've deemed Greenmarket Grains Week. We are seeing a lot more varieties of grains coming into our markets from regional farmers in the last few years. And to really highlight that and draw attention to it in our city audience and constituents of shoppers, we wanted to devote a week of programming to kind of educate people about what you can do with all these grains that are now available. So we started on Sunday. We had a rye sandwich event at New Amsterdam Market, and the Danish consulate came, and a guest chef came, and all kinds of people lined up and had these fantastic open-faced sandwiches on rye bread. And then we moved on to having a home bakers meetup on Monday night. So people from around the city came, and the price of admission was a loaf of your own home-baked bread. So people came with white bread, and they came with sourdoughs, and they said, how do I get a better crust, and how do I start a starter? It never works. And we talked shop and answered questions and ate a lot of bread. And then tonight we're having our educated eater panel, which is part of a quarterly series that Greenmarket has. And we had one in September at the Brooklyn Kitchen about processing, and now we're turning an eye to grains. But we have flyers about a few more events we have this week in the back. So on your way out, definitely help yourselves. We have a bread baking class at the Brooklyn Kitchen this Saturday, working specifically with einkorn, which is an ancient grain. And on the table with the information about our other programs, you'll see these jars of grains from the region, and then also there's some einkorn on the side. Then we have a booklet called the Greenmarket Guide to Grains that talks about all these different grains, their nutritional values, where they're grown, how they can be used. We also have a recipe booklet and a map of our New York City markets, and we have 51, so there's probably one very close to where you live. So anyway, thank you for coming, and I'll turn it over to June Russell, who's going to be our moderator for the evening.
Thanks, June. Thanks for coming out tonight, everybody. We're very excited about Grains Week and where this sort of semi-intentional project has led us and keeps evolving. As Fabio was saying, that grains have become more of interest in the past couple years is an aspect that is we keep backing into as all local food systems are continuing to evolve and re-emerge, and it's very exciting work for us, and this has certainly been an aspect that has been tremendous for us to work on, and we're honored to work on it. My position with Greenmarket is I run the farm inspections department, and that has also evolved into some strategic development, which comes out of spending a lot of time out in the region, seeing literally what the terrain looks like, what's happening out there, listening to growers, seeing some of the barriers that they're up against, some of the logistical issues. And after a few years of that, starting to be able to make some connections and see who's been doing what where and how we can bring people together. I brought some maps, I think I put them up here. Visuals, so much better. This is a map of our region at Greenmarket. So when we started considering grains, this work stemmed out of a question that we had with our bakers specifically, which was how to get our bakers to be more mission compliant. We have a farmer-based mission at Greenmarket. We're there to support regional agriculture, local growers, and provide fresh food to New Yorkers, I think is close to how it says it literally. And there had been a rule on the books that said bakers need to be using local flour, but then if you can't find any, you don't really have to use it. And it was a rule that was not really enforceable. So when I started my job with Greenmarket, that was one of the first issues that I was asked to contend with. So my question was, what is happening? If we're going to change a rule and it has to be enforceable, where can we set our expectations? So that took a couple years. I think the rule just went into effect this last April. So officially it took about 3 years. 2 years of information gathering, which also included work with our bakers, prepping them to use local grains. There are all kinds of issues which I hope we can touch on tonight with some bakers who have more expertise than I do, about what is different, how they're hard or challenging to work with, or just different than we're now used to. So for us, sure, we can go out that way, thanks. We're located here in the city. Our region contains all of New Jersey. We're out into Pennsylvania, about at the Susquehanna River. We include the Finger Lakes, where Greg is from, up in Trumansburg here, which is near Ithaca. A big chunk of this is Adirondacks. It's not very productive in terms of farmland, so we jump over. We do cover Vermont, Massachusetts, Connecticut. So to identify where grain is in production, and part of the work was to find out who's doing what where, who the growers are, and in addition, what sort of infrastructure do we have? And that's not, Greenmarket does not work in a commodity system. We're a different sort of food system that supports small producers. But nonetheless, infrastructure, as we'll get into a little bit, is a big issue in agriculture across the board. Equipment, small scale equipment, processing facilities, and it's no different if you're talking about slaughterhouse facilities than if you're talking about grain processing. We've lost so much of our small and medium scale infrastructure. So if you start down here, there's a mill in Lancaster, Pennsylvania called Daisy Flour, and they'll be at our pancake breakfast on Sunday. And they're working with grain growers in mostly Pennsylvania, and they are starting to source some grains from New York State as well. And then we have the Burkett Mills, which is up here in Penn and they do a lot of buckwheat and soft wheat, which Western New York produces quite a bit of soft wheat. And then we have Champlain Valley Mills, which is over here, and Sam Sherman has become a great ally, and he's been working with growers and put a call out after we had some meetings this past winter to purchase grains. It was about 1,000 acres he wanted to contract for. So it's when something like that happens, when we have a miller engage in the conversation and put a call out to growers, and the growers want to plant more grains, we're having an impact, and that's tremendously exciting. Now those are, on our scale of production, those are our bigger players. Folks like Alton and Greg are smaller scale, and although Alton's partner is scaling up right now, he would still be considered a micro mill. This is much smaller production. A lot of what we see at Greenmarket is on a retail scale and is smaller production. We did pass our baker's rule where bakers have to be using a minimum of 15% flour, local flour, but where they're sourcing that from has become interesting. There's a big range. There's the bottom of the market and there's the top of the market. And the bottom is the cheapest, maybe most efficient, slightly lower quality. Top of the market, it's going to be more expensive, higher quality, more character, more flavor. And within our bakers, just at Greenmarket, we're seeing people use grains across that spectrum. Okay, I'll pass this around. The other thing that I just want to point out is that when a lot of people who've been working on this equation or this issue have come together to discuss, what are the next steps, where are the places that we need more education. Everybody seems like they're on this big learning curve where our growers are getting re-educated, our millers are getting educated, our bakers are having to get educated, and the consumer as well. And that's a big part of our push this week, is to really put grains into the vocabulary of local foods. But when we consider a larger food system, this is still very small. This is a very nascent piece of the picture. And the facilities are a little bit disparate. We don't have clusters yet. So there's a lot of challenges to really scale this up and make it work. But hopefully, as you guys can attest, the demand that we're seeing down here and the interest at Greenmarket in the city and in the press has an impact. Growers feel like there's another crop that they can invest in and make money at. And at Greenmarket, that's our bottom line. We know that growers, they can't make an alternate source. They can't change who they buy something from. They plant it, they commit to it. They need to be able to make a living at it. So right now we're hopefully building confidence, but we also want that to follow through and be something that's viable in the long run. So I'll pass this way. Thanks. And I'm going to move on and have everybody else make their introduction. Just real briefly, Alton Ehrenhardt was probably one of the first people that I met when I set out to try to find out what was happening. He's been working with Don Lewis, who's been in Greenmarket for a long time. He had been a honey producer and then became a baker and really really bought into the idea of working with local grains before the rest of our market did. So that was my starting point. It's like, we have somebody here who is doing this. He's sourcing from a farm in Dutchess County. So I went up and found Alton, and I think you were the person who had said to me that if we want to make this work, you should require that everybody start using 10%. And so that's what we did. We made it 15, but let's do it, we'll live with it, and we'll see what happens. So, Alton, introduce yourself and your background.
Other than what's on the little sheet in front of you folks, I've been farming since I was a kid. I came from the Midwest to here. My interest in grains is that I wanted to grow my own. And I wanted to eat my own flour and enjoy my own baked goods, and that's really the essence of how I got into this. I am located in Dutchess County, as it says on the sheet, a little more than an hour's ride on the train down here. And I've been certified organic with NOFA New York now for a little over a decade, I guess. Yeah, all over a decade. And as it says on the sheet, this is the first year that our sales of human consumption grains surpassed our sales of grains for animal feed, and that's what I've been working on since I've been at Lightning Tree, is producing either beef, lamb, pork, or chicken, or producing feed to be used for the production of animals. And it hasn't been until I met Don and shortly thereafter met June that I got interested in doing the human consumption grains. And interesting, you know, kind of a little interesting circle to be here now this much later and find that suddenly that's the largest part of my business is a shop. And so, as quirky as it may sound, that meeting that we had all that time ago must have had or is in some kind of collusion with this trend towards more interest in human grains. And that's what I'm working on. You guys are all having a hard time hearing us? I apologize.
How's that? Okay. Oh. I'm Greg Mall. I'm the miller at Farmer Ground Flour, which is up in the Finger Lakes in Ithaca. And we just started a couple years ago. Don and Alton were partly the inspiration for that. And, at that point, what they've been doing and what other people had been doing had already sort of established the fact that there's a demand for this stuff. And the two farmers involved, Tor Oshner and Cayuga Pure Organics, they also do dry beans at the markets. They had this idea for a little while. They said, hey, let's get more money for our grains. So they brought me on board. I had been working on the farms to do the milling. And we thought it might be a part-time thing for me, but it became clear pretty quickly that to do it right, it had to be my job. So I feel like we're just getting to the point where I have the tools at my disposal to really start meeting the demands of what people are asking for, or at least begin, not just, hey, this is what we ground, here's what you got, but so hopefully this is the beginning of a bigger dialogue. And Greenmarket has been totally instrumental and irreplaceable. This business wouldn't have happened without the Greenmarket system, so we're incredibly grateful for that.
And I'm Nathan Leamy. I sort of represent the grab bag panelist here. My background is in college I worked on a farm raising alfalfa. Then later on in college I worked in bakeries, and after college I got a research fellowship to travel for about a year and a half, looking at how agricultural policy was changing grain consumption around the world. So I spent time with researchers and growers in Mexico, looking at how wheat is replacing indigenous corn populations. Then moved on to India and spent time looking at how pseudo-cereals like millet and sorghum were being replaced by wheat and rice in consumption of bread there. Then moved on to France, did an apprenticeship in a bakery in France, learning how to bake, as well as learning about the politics that was going on in agriculture policy domestically there, as well as import politics of what they were doing with the United States. And then moved on to Egypt and spent time looking at how, again, American agricultural policy was affecting the way that the subsidization system works, and sort of pita and body bread and sort of the local breads they've been eating for millennia have been changing over the past couple decades. I now work for Slow Food USA, which is a nonprofit organization that works nationally to empower people to make change in our food system, to bring integrity to food and farming. I work in the national office, and we do a lot of work with biodiversity, as well as work increasing access for individuals, consumers, and farmers to be able to sort of work to eat better. And also on the side, I teach bread baking classes, so I'm sort of the home baker. though I trained and worked in professional bakeries, I sort of transitioned into home baking and sort of my love of eating bread and spreading the word about eating bread to the public.
Thank you. I want to ask, you guys, Alton, as a grain grower and transitioning to being primarily a grain grower and then grains for human consumption. First of all, what is it? Can you tell us what you grow, and including varieties, and what has been some of the biggest challenges to learning how to do those over the years that you've been growing grain?
The varieties at Lightning Tree are corn, oats, wheat, triticale, on and off. I've done barley, rye, and spelt. The varieties are a lot. I can't even remember them all. I've tried a lot of different varieties. Most of the varieties that I have now are varieties that did well when I trialed them early on and have now become a landrace variety because I've been saving their seed for a number of years. So their genealogy is suspect because they kind of become their own. I still do purchase corn seeds every year, but that's generally the only seed that I'm purchasing. All the rest of it I'm growing, cleaning, and replanting myself, or on the farm. I think to get to what your second part was is the varieties that I guess the first challenge was someone said you can't grow hard wheat here in the East Coast, and that kind of slapped me in the face because that's what I wanted to do, was to grow hard wheat for bread baking. And so I just procured a bunch of different hard wheats from as many people as I could get them from and started growing them, and at the same time started researching what had been grown in the Hudson Valley traditionally. And I guess the biggest thing I found was that most of the varieties today that are on the market as seed varieties are suited towards being grown in the arid West, Colorado and places like that. And the East Coast is very humid, so the difficulty is not necessarily the type or variety of seed, but our climate. And so getting the variety that works with the climate was what was important. And now the varieties of hard wheat and soft wheat that I have are probably closer to the varieties that would have been grown in this area in the, say, 1760s to 1820s, something like that. I did, along the way, get a little sidetracked in growing some ancient wheats. Someone has mentioned Einhorn and some of those varieties, but one of the interesting things is that because we don't have the infrastructure that June mentioned, one of the biggest problems for me is that I don't have the equipment to remove the hull off of some of the ancient varieties. So like the spelt and the Einhorn and things like that, for me, are difficult in an extra process, and that I don't have that machinery to process it, and so I therefore have to spend money to truck it someplace to get it processed, dehulled. We were talking about that just before we started, and so I have not gone towards a lot of the ancient varieties just because, for me, they're extra work and I can't really do them.
Yeah, I was looking down, we've put together this display that's in the back, and the list of the grains that are available at Greenmarket, and there's a good number of grains that hulls are the barrier, the real barrier to access. And you know, Greg happens to be closer to Klaus Martins, who does have the equipment to dehull some things, but that was sort of a revelation to realize, like, we could have so much more if we had dehullers, if we had, you know, and it seems like such a small barrier, but it's a huge barrier.
But then again, if you can, I guess where I often like to go with this, because this is a real pertinent subject for me, is the demand from those of you who are out there, who are eaters, who are eating bread, significantly higher for those ones that are ancient varieties? I mean, does everyone see or taste or feel compassionate about those ancient varieties? And if you do, then the infrastructure will come just as the grain has come along. If there isn't that interest, if we can bake things that we like and enjoy without that infrastructure, without that need for those varieties, without those types, then maybe that won't come. And that'll be an interesting thing to kind of watch.
Mm-hmm. I think so. And the same question, Greg, with what are you guys growing? What are you producing up there? And you as a miller have had a different set of skills to learn and different challenges to learning your trade now.
Same basic grains: wheat, corn, spelt, rye, buckwheat, soft wheat, and hard wheat. And oats, we're still figuring out the oat thing. Is there enough demand for oat flour? Oat processing is complicated because you get rancidity pretty quickly if you don't steam them, which is a really energy intensive process. So none of us have gotten the investment up for that yet. But there's this hulless oat variety. We're not sure if that may or may not be a winner. So that's a little more complicated, but we've got our hands full with the basics, you know. And we're getting into doing, I'm getting into doing white flour, not just whole wheat flour, getting into doing pancake mixes and stuff like that. So, and really I think where the most learning, where we have the most to do in terms of learning is getting up to speed in terms of like the world of baking science. You know, we've just been focusing on growing the grain, keeping it from sprouting, getting it to the mill, and getting it to you guys. But there's a whole world of like, you know, farinograph. I don't know how many sophisticated bakers there are out here, but like farinograph curves, and we don't even know. We know we can make high protein bread wheat, but we don't know how much variability within our entire crop there is. So we've had bakers say we're getting inconsistent results. We don't know, man, is that because the grind is inconsistent? Is that because we're not, you know, regulating moisture when it leaves the mill? I mean, modern milling is like crazy, incredibly complicated. So we need to get up to speed in terms of just wheat.
Mm-hmm.
And also, like Alton was saying, ancient grains, that there's a lot for us to learn there. The whole gluten thing makes it interesting because we want, you know, people who are gluten sensitive, we want to provide an alternative, but on the other hand, some of those crops don't yield so well. So that's got to be a consideration for us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in the past couple months, as I've been asked to talk more about how this has happened and what our role has been at Greenmarket, and I was thinking one day, you know, or even looking at some of the baker audits and looking at some folks who might still be using commodity flour, and I see a 50-pound bag of flour for $12, and I'm just baffled by it now. I can't comprehend it anymore. And I thought, you know, here's this product that seems so ubiquitous and simple, and from everything I've learned over the past 3 years, it is the most complicated and of almost all the things that I've encountered so far in agriculture anyway, from what it takes to grow, to get it harvested, to get it dried to the right moisture content, and then to, if it needs processing, if it needs milling, and then you get it into the hands of the baker. And wheat is anything but simple. It's very complicated.
Just one more note on that. Wheat's the most complicated, but the cool thing is we grow all this other stuff that is less complicated. Rye flour is so easy to mill. Buckwheat flour is ridiculously easy to mill. So we'd like to encourage.
Making it simple.
Yeah, I mean, people are interested in the big picture. What's growing around here? How can we support sustainable agriculture? And that's part of it. Like, eat more buckwheat.
So, and another thing about that that ties in with history, at least the Hudson Valley history, is that's kind of how this country has grown. You eat what you have, and so if the region can support what it is that you're growing, then that's what you enjoy, and that's what you specialize in. And so I think it's okay for us to separate out where we do want to compete, and maybe we don't want to compete in the white flour market. And so maybe we do want to compete in some of the more interesting things that folks want to enjoy, because that's a specialty that we can dial in on and concentrate on and set ourselves apart from the large wheat producing, making flour kind of thing.
We'll definitely come back to that and learn how to love buckwheat 25 ways. But Nathan, do you bring a different perspective to this, having seen grains grown internationally and the impact of the Green Revolution? And we wanted to have you sort of chime in with your perspective on some of these issues of seeing different sorts of varieties. What sort of scale range have you seen? Small to large?
Yeah.
What is large?
I mean, so to start off sort of working off things you guys said, one of the really interesting things to me, and one of the things I was studying in my project was looking at how people study food. That it's really easy to think about, when we talk flour, one of the reasons why flour is really complicated is that when you talk about an apple, you can see an apple, you know what that apple is. Literally, apples are the same genetic material over decades, hundreds of years. You take slices of an apple, you keep it going. Whereas with grains, they change a lot. They change a lot in terms of making hybrids, they change a lot in terms of making land races, they change a lot in terms of the soil you have and the fertilizer you're using, and the moisture and this and that of the seasons. One grain will change a lot based on those variations. And then on top of that, you grind up that grain you had and you turn it into this white powdery stuff that you can't eat, you can't really interact with, you can't visibly see anything with it. And then you have to take it to a whole new expert, make it into some sort of baked good, and that product is the end result. So you just have so many variables in between, it's very difficult to tell sort of what exactly you're doing. Even if you have the same plot of land, you think you're using the same seed, you think you have just about the same weather, you can get a lot of variation there. A couple big changes have happened just in the past century to century and a half. When you talk about bread and you think about bread, the bread that we have today is worlds different from the bread that we had 50 years ago, let alone 100 years ago. It wasn't until about 150 years ago that we began to be able to separate wheat and have whole wheat flour and white flour. That was a huge split. That once there was white flour, it wasn't just these heavy breads anymore. About 100 years ago, they began mechanizing the kneading of dough. Rather than having to knead all dough by hand, they got sort of crank methods or horse-powered or mule-powered methods to knead large batches of dough, which significantly, again, changed the way the bread was consumed. And then over the past 100 years, with hybridization and with sort of production of advanced races of wheat, we've about tripled, quadrupled the amount of gluten that is in sort of the average wheat that you're growing today. So people oftentimes complain about, the wheat we have is such soft wheat in the Northeast, but what you're talking about, that you use what you have. 100 years ago, people didn't have these hardy wheats because they literally didn't exist. And then 60 years ago, they didn't have the hardy wheats because people weren't shipping them back and forth across the country like we do today. It is possible to make bread with whatever you have. It takes skill and it takes a knowledge of that. I think one of the big difficulties that probably you guys are running up against is that people are accustomed to working in a sort of global food system where you can get a standardized product that's going to be exactly the same year round. It's going to be exactly the same sort of white flour that looks the same, works the same every time consistently. And it, granted, is much more difficult to have to adapt your recipe, but that's totally possible. In my travels, one of the really interesting things that I found was that I went a lot of places where there was no indigenous tradition of using one type of product. That in India, they've been growing wheat for thousands and thousands of years, but it wasn't until the Americans came in the 1960s to sort of introduce dwarf hybridized American wheat varieties that they began using really hard, high gluten flours. And that totally changed the way that bread was consumed. And it really proliferated. There are now dozens and dozens of types of breads that change from one town to another in terms of this is what they're growing here because this is what's introduced here due to circumstances or environment. That's what came into being. So here, I think there is a lot of opportunity. I mean, I think this is a place where we have a chance to sort of renew our food traditions, where there are things that we were growing 100 years ago, 200 years ago, that you're bringing back. And it's going to be great to see what we can do with it. People are accustomed to having, as I said, this sort of standard bland, intentionally bland flour that you can work with and have that consistently bland. People like consistency. And now you're going to have to deal with something that is unexpected, that is going to be a challenge to work with. But in that challenge, you're going to have highs and lows. Sometimes you're going to make bread that's not going to have such a good mouthfeel. It's not going to pull or have tear or rise as much. Sometimes you're going to have something that has wonderful flavor. And the ash content and the mineral values you're going to get from that totally, for me, compensates for the fact that it's sometimes a gamble.
All right, I want to just take a break and get a couple of vocabulary terms down. You had both mentioned land races, and we explain what that is.
In my case, it's fairly simple. I'm taking the same seed that I've grown this season. I'm now cleaning it, and I'll be planting it. And once you do that for a certain number of years, you've now taken that variety and changed its identity, as you pointed out. My specific farm has its own uniqueness in that it's in its particular location, far away from your farm, and so by taking that seed and replanting it, it's I guess the easiest term is it's customized itself to my locale, and it's now become a landrace specific to the area where I'm growing.
Do you have a name for those?
No. No, they work.
Alton's wheat. And then also triticale, I think, is new for a lot of people. I know that you grow it and Don sells it at market, but it's a grain that I don't think people are familiar with.
And that's a cross between wheat and rye. And it's I don't know how else to describe it, as just a minor type of grain to play with. I don't think it would become somebody's everyday flour.
And they made it as just it was a better growing feed crop, right? That was the basic idea.
So it works in a small quantity in the mix, but it's certainly not going to be a major component.
Okay. And what do you mean by that in terms of scale? Like, I know that you manage about a 400-acre farm. How much of that is in production for your food grade grains?
Because I don't use fertilizer except on one crop. So my rotation is a pretty slow rotation. I think you asked me to explain it. It is corn, oats, wheat, sod, and the sod portion of the rotation can be 3 years, as much as 3 years, maybe even more. But because my rotation is a fairly slow one, and because I don't use a lot of fertilizer inputs, I don't usually have more than 30 acres of any one variety. And so if I were to have triticale, it would be a small amount. And again, it might be a grain that somebody would put in a 5-grain bread just so you could say that it was a 5-grain bread, but it's certainly not going to be the major component of the bread.
Why is that?
Characteristic of the grain. So it's, it doesn't have the gluten. It's not a friendly type of flour to work with. So it's as a chop, as a grain that's cut up, it makes interest in the bread, but its flour is just can only be a minor portion of the whole mix.
Does it taste just like wheat flour and rye flour mixed together? Or
No,
it has its own thing.
it has its own
Okay.
kind of identity.
I was wondering, Nathan, if the way that you were describing the history of bread production, This is why the world over we've generally seen flatbreads more than we've seen, the nice big farm loaf that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big reason. So, also talking about vocabulary, we're talking a lot about gluten tonight, because people love gluten, or they hate it if they're allergic to it. Gluten it's a protein that is in wheat. It's in a number of other grains as well, but in very small quantities. Basically, there are some simple proteins called glucanids that are in the wheat. Once you add water, they form together into this complex protein called gluten. Gluten has these wonderful properties that it both has elasticity as well as liquidity, so it can stretch and pull, as well as it can have some ability to flow. That ability to flow and have flexibility is what really creates the great feel in your mouth when you're sort of chewing and tearing on a slice of bread. And it's what in cornbreads or rice breads or rye breads means that there's much less of that tear or that pull. Oftentimes when you're talking about flours, you sort of split things up, that there are white flours and whole wheat flours. Whole wheat is the whole of the wheat berry, white flour is just a portion of it. And then you talk about protein levels. Those are sort of the basic consumer demand. But then once you get into the complicated things, you can start talking about ash content, which is the amount of minerals in there, which also sort of plays on flavor. You can talk about not just the amount of protein that's in a grain, but also the strength of the protein. There are soft and there are hard proteins, which we'll talk about sort of how tightly it pulls back or how much it'll sort of stretch out and flow. So all these things sort of wind up being really complicated when you're talking about grains. Part of the reason, that for sure you see a lot of flatbreads in the world is that most grain just can't rise. You can't get something that's going to hold its own volume.
An audience question, is anyone in the Bread Bakers Guild of America on that website at all? Is anyone familiar with that?
Peter?
Okay. I mean, I've read some, this may be completely wrong, but I've read some stuff to the effect that in Europe, soft or lower protein wheats are more the norm. And a lot of the great breads in France are actually produced with lower protein wheats, and so it's a matter of the baking techniques or the baking traditions in terms of being able to get the results you want regardless of the protein.
Certainly, I mean, the places I was working in France, they were using mainly French flour, which is typically pretty soft. It's somewhat similar, depending on the part of the country, parts of it are fairly similar to the Northeast. They did import American wheat for other breads. The baguettes generally use a pretty soft wheat, and that's why you get all that tear from a baguette and that wonderful level of pull. But for a lot of the country breads, they would be mixing in, lots of the grains we've been talking about today. And then a lot of the sourdough breads that have a lot of sort of fluff and substance to them, that's what they use the imported harder wheats for.
So there is sort of a scientific limit to the amount of rise you can get out of it.
Yeah, I mean, people oftentimes like to think about there's sort of right and wrong, and it's not. I mean, it's right and wrong for the product you're trying to produce, and that you're going to have a much easier time if you're using the intended flour for the intended outcome. But knowing what the intended flour is and what the grain should be can be a tricky game. That said, you can still get by using the wrong thing, or the wrong thing.
And one further thing we haven't, vocabulary word that we haven't talked about is the leavening agent. And that greatly affects what the bread is going to be as well. If you're using a leavening agent as opposed to a sourdough, that greatly changes what you're working with. If you're trying to do it with just a sourdough, it's much harder.
Although I've heard someone in Pennsylvania I've been talking to had been trying to, there's been this article by, that Karen Hess wrote about 20, maybe 30 years ago, saying that soft wheat was the grain of our region and that people made bread traditionally with this. And so they grow soft wheat in Pennsylvania, and so they were determined to try to make, this loaf of bread using the soft wheat, and found that they could only do it with a real starter. That it just plain wasn't working with a
And
commercial
because they
yeast.
had a leavening agent, they could then make a bread that was more enjoyable for them.
Mhm.
And one of the things that I found about the Hudson Valley is that the reason we went to the soft wheat is that we were no longer able to grow the harder wheat, which was requiring more fertility. And so, I again, you know, it depends on what your soil is and what your program of fertility is and a lot of those different things, but the history of it was that they just didn't take good enough care of their soil here in the Hudson Valley, and so that's why they had the soft wheat, because they just could no longer grow hard wheat. And then eventually they couldn't even grow soft wheat, and they could only grow dry.
And you said you don't have any off-farm, like nitrogen inputs? Okay. Most farms do. So the fact that he's got a closed, nutrient cycle is a good thing,
It's
but
not completely closed. I'm only using the nitrogen for corn.
Yeah, okay.
Do you know what Eric and Tor do? Greg?
Chicken manure, yeah,
And lots of
in a big way.
Well, one of the,
And again, it works great as a farmer if you have that. You know, I just don't happen to have in my area, the Hudson Valley, any longer that infrastructure where there's a large number of chicken farms. So I don't have that readily available to me. Otherwise, if I did, I'd probably use it.
I have a chicken farm we can hook you up with in Dutchess County. Just sort of sticking on the theme of sort of sustainable production. One of the things that has come up in conversations around grains and, the question of like, why would we do this? And we had talked about this yesterday a little bit, but just sort of in the larger picture, like it's difficult, it's easier to do it in the Midwest, and why would you take this on? What are we in it for in the long run? And there's many things in there that you could all respond to, but one of them, sticking with sustainability, is that to encourage producers to maybe work small grains back into rotation. I'm not a grower. I don't know if that would really happen. I think looking at the way people tend to specialize on one hand, maybe that wouldn't happen. On the other, we do see more diversification. And again, as people find that they could actually have another crop that they could make a little extra income on, it does have to be viable in the long run. Someone asked me recently why we didn't have grains in the Northeast. It's like, because no one could make money at them, period. Like, you can't compete with commodities. But I guess sticking with that first part with our grains, working grains into our regional farms and farm rotations, something that's positive for long-term sustainability.
So you're looking at me like I should take this on.
You can
So-
skip. I'll go.
So I'm gonna, we did talk about it a little bit yesterday, but one of the things that occurred to me as I was sitting here was that your visit to my farm was a part of that equation. And so the fact that there are people here in this audience who want to have it means that it has happened. It will happen. As those of you who are interested in grains voice your interest, then we grow. And so that's the first thing for me is this idea, which I didn't come up with. Someone here at Greenmarket's very smartly came up with, to ask bakers to actually become locavores of one type or another, and to support a local economy. And that's, as far as I'm concerned, that's the number one thing. If there's an interest for us to grow it, then it will fall. So for me, that's the most important thing.
So the question is, how do we move forward getting grains back into farmers?
And is this something that's positive in terms of sort of rotation and sustainable production, I think?
Yeah.
I mean, you guys...
Well, yeah. The region is suited for most grains that, like, we're focusing on the hard wheat issue, but
Another thing that we haven't talked about is there has been in this country a large push for corn growers. You can sell corn because somebody's paying money for corn. And so what's behind that? Well, part of what's behind that is what is the demand for corn? If the demand for corn is to make sweeteners, then you grow lots of corn so that they can make lots of sweeteners. I don't think that's the kind of thing that a lot of the farmers that I talk to are interested in doing, and so that's not what we're doing, and that's why we're growing these alternative grains. And that does create a different market, and since we can grow these other grains, why not? Why not be part of something that is not just a corn economy?
On that note, surprisingly, a couple years ago, non-commodity corn was not available. Yeah. You guys had a small amount. I think Don was using it for his baked goods and to grind and sell retail, but not until you guys started producing, Greg, did we have corn that we could get to a few bakers who were asking for it. That was, which was pretty shocking. It's like we had none of it.
We should be totally honest. The corn up until just last week, the corn we were grinding was the same that farmers are grinding for animal feed. So that's an example of how it's a no-brainer. It's already there. It's already being produced. Now we did start grinding food. We grew a food grade variety, but people like the normal stuff. You know what I mean? I mean, they're it's perfectly good. But Lakeview's a good example. Lakeview Organic Grains is a feed mill upstate near Burkett Mills, and they basically created the market for organic feed grains in New York State, or at least
Filled it.
Yeah, they own it, or they are it now.
It's sort of that's Klaus and Mary Hall Martins are sort of the godparents to a lot of the grain production.
Just as there has been this interest in local grains or local farmers to come to green markets, there has been a huge interest in organic production of, say, milk. And so Lakeview has filled this large interest in growing, say, organic milk, and that means that you have to have corn for the animals that produce the milk. And so they've gotten very large, as our business has, growing grains for animal production.
And then to touch on, I think there is value in having a local grain economy for the sake of diversity. That it's pretty dull to think that we're going towards a place where there was only going to be, one dominant type of wheat that was going to be everywhere. And I think there's just inherent value in us having options. And then beyond that options, some of those options are actually really tasty. And that you can make things that taste unlike anything you'd be able to make with that one monocultural, sort of boring, red, hard winter wheat. So there's that, and then I think there's value in sort of exploring what you have with your terroir, with your sort of local climate. That we've been working so hard, sort of bending over backwards to try and grow hard wheats in the Northeast, because that's what the market wanted, and you'd be using all these nitrate fertilizers and all this sort of awful stuff. Well, why bother when there is an option to do something that is going to work sort of in conjunction with the land rather than against the land? And then some of it's going to take education, that people have forgotten that these are things that were being grown here before and that do have actual uses. That they're not, it's funny to hear you talk about corn as animal feed. It wasn't animal feed 100 years, corn was entirely person feed. The idea that there's such thing as animal feed corn is such a backwards notion, that now we're trying to reintroduce this product to people when it had so long been for people, and that it's almost beneath us to be eating this animal food.
What was interesting, Greg, I remember you saying once that I think the New York Times had written something about your polenta and your sales were doing really well, and then you said, well, it's great, I'm selling all this polenta, but I have all this cornmeal now that I can't get rid of it, so we need to build markets for cornmeal.
That's the one advantage to the food grade corn, is that you get more polenta, less cornmeal.
What do you do with all the cornmeal?
Well, I'm told that big mills, corn flour, how many people use corn flour, is like a loss leader. They just practically give it away, because even with good varieties, you're still making a lot of it. And that's sort of what we have done, more or less, sell the cornmeal cheap so we can sell more polenta. If people were willing to get educated to the point where they were like, oh man, farmer ground flour is like got this surplus of cornmeal. I want to make some cornbread. Yeah, but yeah, that would be great.
Well, that's certainly something we're working on. And it has been interesting to the level of resistance or fixation or whatever it is. We've been in conversation with our bakers and some of the larger, we've gone outside and started to engage the larger baking community in New York City also, because we recognize that to scale this up, you guys need to move a lot of flour.
Yeah, it boggles my mind. It really does.
Wait till like
For this to really be a viable.
for us.
Yeah, like if we're gonna have something that's gonna go more
There
than
need to
5
be about
years.
20 of us
Yeah.
sitting at this table,
Yeah.
realistically.
But people really are fixated on hard wheat, and there was about 6 months ago we were in a meeting, and I finally lost my patience with that because if you look at the map and see where we are, it's like this is not conducive to where we are, and yet we have
Yeah.
we try to advocate on behalf of growers, and then look at that map and see like we have potential to grow all these different kinds of grains. They're all going to be great food grains that can be integrated into people's home cooking practices, and yet we still had this persistent drive to. I started feeling like it was the diva of the grain. Kept stealing the conversation. It's like, what about the hard wheat?
Yeah.
We need to go farther north. So I think there's also a lot of potential to keep, obviously to keep educating the consumer and to keep educating the bakers. And I wonder, Nathan, when you said to renew our traditions, or are we creating them? Like how far back? What do we have even that? I don't know.
I mean, I think it's going to have to be a combination. That there are going to be, you're not going to be able to say overnight, oh, everyone should start eating, brick-like bread that we would have had 150 years ago. I certainly don't want to eat bread that feels like a brick. So we don't need to go all the way back, but we do need to sort of get outside of this mentality that you can't work with anything besides hard wheats, and that there are many breads that were produced back in the day, or there are many recipes that we have today that you can adapt and that you can change things to. Oftentimes, probably the bigger hurdle that a lot of people work with is consistency. That if you find this new grain and if you find it that you can get it the same way every time, then you can eventually adapt yourself to that and learn about it and learn how to work with this new tool. But especially as growers are sort of just starting, it can be difficult to figure out sort of who wronged who. Is it that the grain is changing, or is it the baker doesn't understand what to do? And there's definitely a supply and demand issue where which one is going to lead the other one, and that if you mark down your cornmeal prices, someone's going to figure out something ingenious to do with cornmeal eventually.
And I actually like that idea a lot. And one of the things that is just quite obvious is if you've got all this cornmeal, why not encourage bakers to bring something to the market he's got a lot of?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's the beautiful part of how this market needs to work, is that if this gentleman can produce polenta, great, but if he's got all this cornmeal that he doesn't know what to do with, by all means, can't we find some way to bring you cornmeal, or to bring you cornbread, or whatever it may be?
Mm-hmm.
And finding that, working out those little things are what maximize us small producers so that we can continue to do it. And obviously, that one thing could help out his business greatly.
Well, I think at the market, we've certainly seen that with other products, like, in the past couple of years there's been this renewed interest in the trade of being a butcher, and we now have celebrity butchers.
Right.
And where they really are pushing themselves to use the whole animal. It's not just about the pork chop, it's like bone and the marrow, and but we really haven't extended our thinking in all those directions with all the things that we produce. We're still a little bit of a fickle market that way, I think. So.
And that's okay. It's just, I think that's what allows this kind of natural thing to take place, is that he will eventually make that contact, and something will be done with it, and it'll come up, and it'll be a new thing at the green markets, and
Florence fabric camel
There you go.
Great. Should we open this up to questions to folks? Unless there's, do any of you want to add something to anything we haven't touched on yet?
How about me?
If anyone has any questions, you can just raise your hand.
Is that good? Okay, yeah. So my question is, you're talking about all these new things we have, and the trend is obviously been monoculture and kind of the same kind of wheat for a long time. What makes you think that, you know, because clearly it's more work and the people aren't accustomed to having a large variety of all these grains, and you said you don't want to be eating brick bread for a long time. Obviously people prefer a sweet, high gluten, very white flour. It's like our palate loves it. So why this time around, this whole renovation that we're doing of our eating practices, we're working really hard to push diversity. Everyone should eat more diverse diets. But our palate and our infrastructure has been clearly pushed everything towards monoculture. Why this time around, after this, is it not going to go back towards monoculture again?
I would argue that we don't have we're not hardwired to enjoy this white fluffy bread that we get. I mean, it's a very situational environment we have right now. It's not because people were sitting around 50 years ago and they said, let me imagine exactly what I want to eat, and then let's have the entire country agree on that is the exact thing all of us want to eat that we haven't been eating. There's been a lot of things in between that once a monopoly gets rolling, it's much easier for that to continue. And that sort of once this became the dominant product, once it became a commodity crop that could be sold globally, then suddenly you had a global product, and prices went way down. It became much easier to trade. It became much easier to have accessible in all sorts of markets. People do like familiarity. They do like sweetness. They do like fluffy things. These are all sort of natural instincts. Who doesn't love fluffy things? You don't necessarily have to give up any of those to still be using alternative grains, to be using other types of flour. I think the reason why we can't continue to go towards monoculture is that it's unsustainable. That sort of to keep on going this practice of growing only one product, we're having all sorts of problems with molds, with rusts, with diseases. We're having all sorts of problems with obesity epidemics, with sort of people reacting poorly as things have changed. That it's not sustainable for the environment, it's not sustainable for people, and I don't think socially it's sustainable either. It's really boring if we're all eating the same thing. I think there's been this very natural and organic, people latching on to the celebrity butcher and to local foods isn't just because it's this new trend, but because they realize, oh, this is actually enjoyable. And that from time to time, okay, you might want Wonder Bread, and I won't cast you off as a bad person if you want Wonder Bread, but as long as that's part of a sort of varied diet, I think people are overall happier.
A good example of tastes being formed is pasta. I forget the details, but pasta was actually introduced to the United States, was popularized in the United States by a wheat breeder who knew that durum wheats, pastas made from durum wheat, was agronomically better and more profitable for growers out west. So it was like a move for the sake of the farmers. Then he initiated this huge marketing push, got the USDA behind him to market pasta to Americans. And now, it's pasta. So tastes are definitely malleable, and I feel like our role in this is, people like you are educated enough that you're willing to help us find that sweet spot of what can we produce realistically that isn't a brick that people will eat, so that, say when energy prices rise to the point, we saw a couple years ago bakeries had to raise their prices because fuel costs went up and flour was more expensive to get flour. When it gets to the point where a larger percentage of the population is actually, going to be eating the stuff we grow, that it's not a brick. It's not a brick loaf or something like that. So that's how I see it.
And there is, I mean, this isn't recreating everything anew. I mean, there are plenty of people who are in Eastern Europe and using rye and know exactly how to use rye and use it in a wonderful way. There are plenty of people in Northern Italy who know how to use cornmeal and make cornmeal cakes. There are people in North Africa who know how to use durum, not just for making pasta, but can make leavened breads out of it. I mean, there is this knowledge, and one of the wonderful things about New York City is that we have this food diversity, and tapping into that and sort of finding the people who are going to be the ones who know this, so you don't have to sort of start from scratch.
It's interesting you referred to the brick bread, because the rye bread event that happened at New Amsterdam, were you there, Nathan?
I wasn't. But
Well,
I know rye bread.
or if you go down to New Amsterdam on any Sunday, and you'll see the Finnish baker there who makes these rings of super dense, flat rye bread, and he sells out every week. And he just started purchasing your rye.
It's amazing bread. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's great.
But it is not, if I were coming from a really homogeneous diet, like, I would hate that bread.
Yeah.
And but fortunately, I'm a grown up, and I think that developing your palate is one of the fun things you get to do as an adult, is to sort of keep exploring, and it's really endless.
Yeah.
And in some ways, I feel like teaching people how to taste and think about how they're tasting is really revolutionary, because you change habits that way. Once you can appreciate what you're tasting and you can articulate it and you can have a specific experience, you're going to change. Chances are you're going to change your habits, and you're not going to really. And Wonder Bread now doesn't taste as good as it used to. Or
One of the things that I take from my own perspective and where I'm at in my life is that I'm a parent now. I have a 6-year-old and a 1-year-old. And so I take that to the next level, which is I offer that opportunity for my children to have that unique thing that we grow, that they're exposed to at that age, that not everyone gets a chance to be exposed to. And I think that's also a different thing, is that there are a lot more people who are exposing their kids to something other than Wonder Bread when they're young. And that does change generations. I know 15, 16-year-olds who would never think of eating anything but Wonder Bread. And so for me, giving my child the opportunity to have a chance to try some of those things that I've grown that are different, I think is an experience children should have.
And I feel like I've heard stories from friends of mine who grew up, eating really great food that they hated, and they hated taking to school because their friends had the lunchbox that they wanted.
But maybe they went back to that after
Yeah,
they grew older?
absolutely. And the same with the Finnish baker, where his brother was telling us a story that every time he came back from Finland, he had a special compartment in his suitcase just to bring back the rye bread, because and the Scandinavians are, really addicted to this, and they came out in droves on Sunday to get this bread. So it's very interesting to think about what your, whether it's culture or taste,
What
or,
you get exposed to.
yeah, and and it translates to our habits and what you guys grow ultimately.
So on that question, and I should say thank you very much. I've learned so much about wheat and grains. I can't thank you enough for that education. But on the question of exposure, I'm wondering what the barriers are to larger institutional use of locally grown grains. And I definitely think that you need a celebrity chef to start to be the Caroline Fidanza of the grain movement, right? And start putting beef hearts, the equivalent of beef hearts for grains, on the menu to educate eaters. But going beyond that, is there any effort on the part of New York State to help get these locally grown grains into the school system, for example, or into stores?
Not interesting you would ask. There's some information on the back table. We've been working with New York State Department of Ag and Markets and the New York City Industrial Retention Network. And we got a farm to bakery grant that we just started working on about 2 months ago. So right now it's in a survey phase, and it's working to get flours and grains, everything that we've been seeing so far, folks that we're in contact with, and surveying bakeries to hopefully start buying from the growers in the region. As far as institutions, I think so far it's commercial bakeries that we're targeting. Our piece of it is to be doing something like tonight. We're doing promotions and education. And I don't, from what I hear and know about the farm to school efforts and understand about institutional kitchens, is that for the large part they've really been heat and serve operations. So you're talking about, again, infrastructure, equipment, skill sets, people having to, that means somebody, if you're sending them fresh tomatoes, they have to prep, they have to hold a knife and have a cutting board. And that's much more complicated than you think it would be. So I think that adding baking to that is another, we're probably several years away from that in terms of institutions and schools, although I could very well be wrong. And there could be small schools that are willing to take that on and integrate baking into their program somehow.
But they're buying bread from someone.
Yeah. For the most part, again, I'm sure there's a big spectrum of what the schools are like individually, but I know with the New York school system, it's, small budget sourcing is key in serving size. And for the most part, what I've seen is half-baked bread that they can take out of the freezer and shove in the oven and heat up and pick that up.
One thing though that goes to your question that June has a pretty good handle on is that as small producers, we're not even close to being able to produce enough grains and flours for large bakeries yet.
Although,
and I think you could probably talk a lot about that.
yeah, well, that's the range of, like I was saying, you guys are on the smaller scale. Boy, you build a market and people sure come around.
That's right. That's right.
So there's been some interest from, someone who's interested in tapping Western New York and running it through the ADM mill in Buffalo. And, that's not something I'm personally would be interested in, or maybe I could be convinced of it if I was given a good argument, but, our priority is to work from the ground up and not from the top down.
And that's what I'm trying to point out, is that I think the system that has been taken where it is, kind of like a ground up movement, which is what we have here, has worked pretty well for what we're doing, but it doesn't work for the kind of thing you're talking about. An institution can't just jump in and become a part of it. Yeah, I mean, it may come, but we're not quite there yet.
Yeah, I feel like we could get there, but growing grains for when you're planning for a specific market is a 2-year process.
Sometimes more.
Yeah, so we're pushing the limits of what we have in terms of wheat to sell this year. I mean, there's not excess stuff up. We've sourced all the organic rye in New York State until next June or whatever.
Yeah, it's gone.
So.
Yeah.
But we do have what we would call a conventional grower who's come into the conversation kind of out of the blue, and he's certainly taking a good part of the market in terms of our bakers, because he can sell a bag of flour for $16. Do you know what you sell a 50-pound bag of whole wheat flour for?
Yeah, twice that.
Yeah. Yeah, but you do have customers who don't. The commitment then varies greatly. Some people, it's the bottom line, get me the cheapest I can work with. And some of your customers care more about how it was produced, who's producing it, and flavor.
And they have the ability to market it distinctly and get more money for it. That's the key thing.
Hi, June.
Hello.
I was wondering, how much of a difference would it make if there was, say, hypothetically, a hub market for wholesale grain sales in New York City?
It's sort of a difference. I think that, that's something that we are piloting with the farm to bakery project, and we'll try to, distribution is a big problem also. It's something we keep trying to address when we talk about this equation Because as I was pointing out in the map, you know, first of all, there's sort of, the efforts are really spread out. You know, then to get it to, you know, to get it to market and then out to consumers is, yeah, it's something that we'll be piloting this year, and we'll let you know. But there's a long way to go, and I always wonder where, you know, you have distributors who have become successful because they've learned how to be very efficient. And I was visiting one of our bakers recently, and we were talking about working with some of the local products, and she was like, well, that's not very efficient. And I said, well, we're the inefficient system anyway. So the Greenmarket direct marketing is not. And I think to scale this up and figure out how to distribute to commercial bakers in the city, you know, I think we'll find some of those lines, and the line is where your values are. And that's going to vary based on who our producers are and who those bakers are, and where people are willing to budge, and and hoping that some small distributors will step up. And, you know, like we have seen with Basis and Regional Access and Red Tomato, they're very committed to growers first. Someone back there? Or, oh, sorry.
I have both a suggestion and a question. I'm a consultant for Natural Gourmet Institute for Food and Health, and they have a whole groans approach to chefs that they're putting into commercial kitchens, spas, hospitals. The Johns Hopkins Medical Center is naming a wing after their founder, and they're really nutrition oriented. And I happened to be lucky enough to be there 3 weeks ago in time for lunch, and Chef La Malita was preparing pizza with the chef students with stone ground flours and all kinds of different toppings. It was gorgeous. I think if you got in touch with them and they were able to sample it and see the benefits, that would be terrific. I would also love to hear you address the nutritional health benefits, because we all know that they're there. I don't know if it's been practical to measure, but I've also studied with Institute of Integrated Nutrition, and they consider themselves a movement, and they're looking to give away funding for organizations that can combat diabetes type 2, childhood diabetes, and all the woes that we're all plagued with, and you can save the world.
If only I had my paper so I could write that down.
Can anybody speak to nutritional value? And
I think one of the things that you mentioned was that we're lacking a certain amount of scientific data.
I don't know if it exists for the whole stone ground.
And there's so many different, you know, people say stone ground, and then, you know, does that really mean stone ground, or does that just mean that the flour kind of passed over some stones? Or to be quite honest, you know, there are so many subtleties that I don't know the answer, but I do know that we do need a whole lot more information. It would be great to work with some people who want to find out the difference between what us small growers and millers and producers are producing as compared to the conventional stuff that's out there. And I think that's one of the places where we've really fallen down, is that we don't have that backup. Is it really healthier? Is it really better? Well, I think it. But that doesn't give you your answer.
I think the one thing we know is the freshness thing. That we can distribute quicker. I think there's data on that, right?
I don't have that.
Yeah. So, I mean, of the numbers that I know, there are many, many variables to take into account, but things that definitely make an impact on nutritional value. First of all, the white versus whole wheat. The less processed it is, the more fiber it's going to have, the better your body's going to be processing the sugars that are in there, the more B vitamins you're going to have in there, just better general nutritional content. So in wheat, you get a lot of white versus whole wheat, but most other grains, they are all whole wheat. You don't separate out So using other grains, you will generally be getting a more nutritious version of that grain. And then on top of that, it really varies very much from grain to grain what they'll have. Wheat in general has a lot of protein in it, but doesn't have as much vitamins as a lot of other grains do. In general, the United States population isn't lacking in vitamins. What they have too many of are sugars and fats. When you get fresher grains that haven't been bleached, you get a higher quantity of the vitamins. You get fats that are still whole fats that haven't been broken down by the bleaching process. Get them fresher, you actually have an easier time digesting them because of the way that the gluten sort of gets formed as it ages. So yes, I mean, there is evidence, and especially if you're working with big ag schools, they have lots of research that gets done in terms of nutritional value of various types of grains. I think one of the very difficult things to break out is what is the impact of the grain itself and of the product that you're using, and then what usually goes hand in hand. Usually if you're someone who is working with local organic grains that you hand-picked, you're not going to then toss in all these, gross chemicals into that and make something that is an awful product in the end. You're probably going to put the care into it to make something that's overall going to be good. If you're to make that overall good product using hard red wheat that was bleached from the Midwest, would it be also good? Yeah, it'd probably also be pretty good. Would it be as good? That would be measuring sort of based recipe to recipe.
Can I just have the heat, stove drying part of the flour when you're grinding it, and that keep your acidity and maybe carcinogens?
Yeah, it's usually lower heat than, so it's going to cook things less. It's also going to oftentimes get some trace minerals and elements from the stones if you're actually grinding with real stones rather than stainless steel. But most of that is fairly minimal. And then a lot of concerns go in terms of food allergies. A lot of people think they have allergies to gluten, but in fact have allergies to wheat molds. Depending on the way that your wheat is processed, there's always going to be a little bit of mold toxicity in the grain, and that some people have very severe reactions to that. If they start using fresher wheat, they have a much smaller reaction to that.
We as I'm with small scale food processors, and we give nutrition labels. We charge members a minimal amount, but Don Lewis came to us to do nutrition labels, and we can't do it for grain because there isn't a program that's easily acceptable, easily applicable to our programs that gives the grains. So I mean, you guys are having trouble, but
You're trying to get nutritional
information
for
the
the
label.
label on the back.
Yeah.
I think maybe the American Institute of Baking or someone's got
Someone's got
standard
that.
facts out there. We need to do that too, so we should
Yeah.
figure that out.
With the caveat that usually the standard facts, there's a lot of variation,
Yeah.
and the nutritional value labels, oftentimes when checks are done on them, they are not very accurate in terms of calorie count, in terms of vitamin, especially when you're working with something as localized as land, race, crops. You're going to see something where if you actually wanted a very accurate view of it, you'd have to test it, which would totally not be efficient in terms
Right,
of
but the testing is
economies of
so
scale.
expensive
Oh, yeah.
that small
Incredibly
people
expensive.
can't do the testing. So it needs to be, the science needs to, get out there someplace, like somebody who would have a grant could do that.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
That's the kind of thing that would follow from what you're saying, is
Yeah.
we do need to have a grant so that we can actually put a loaf of our local bread down and say, this is the difference between even, well, I won't say any names, but the difference between a small version bakery and a larger version.
A larger, there's mid-sized bakeries that have very good product, but we need small version as well as we need large. And it's the grains that are the different part that we just really need somebody
We would like to know. Yeah.
takes that on.
Finding out what sort of protein content you have in falling numbers, and Because as I understand now, there's only a couple places in the country that you can send that to as a smaller producer. You know, so to even have those a little more localized, you know, to where production is happening and for smaller producers to get their stuff tested. But it is, you know, one of the exciting things that's happening as,
We're going.
As we move
yeah,
forward.
yep.
Yeah.
And you know, I had learned the term reskillification, you know, a couple months ago, and it's like, that's so much of what's happening from, you know, when the small scale food processors and to all of our growers and processors. So, but to see that it keeps evolving, at least our questions keep changing, which is a really good sign. You know, our issues are different every year.
So, so the discussion has been entirely about flour, and I'm wondering how grains also comes into that, because obviously in a lot of the world, rice, etc. And I live in Massachusetts, and I'm excited that now I can get spelt and emmer from Central Mass, and that, you know, because I don't bake much, but I always have grains in the fridge. So how does that fit into this whole discussion? Is there any difference in what you're growing or selling, or what you can make if you're selling the whole grains for just cooking grains as opposed to milling?
That's part of the processing infrastructure we were talking about. Actually, it's, I don't know, a lot of the stuff you would eat straight, like the, say, oats or emmer or something like that, you know, either dehulled or steamed and rolled. And we can't do that stuff because there's no facilities yet, but we can make flour. So as this all evolves, you'll see more of that.
Back to my little talk about my kids. One of the things that I do every week is to make some breakfast cereal with the grains. I have a KitchenAid rolling mill, an attachment for the KitchenAid that I use to roll the grains into a breakfast cereal. It's as simple as that. If that's somewhere, I'm not sure where you want to go with that, but if that's what you're asking, what you could do with the grains?
No, I'm asking in terms of, as a producer, I buy just the whole spelt, whole emmer, and I just cook it at home and I keep it in the fridge. This is how I use it.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm wondering how that fits into the market, what you can make. You know, you were saying that this is more of a challenge in terms of dehulling it, and so it's harder to create that for consumers. I don't know how that fits into the discussion of what the market is.
So one of the things I said first was that this is the first year our business has actually seen more dollar sales, human consumption-wise, than animal feed-wise. And that is changing how I will look at whether or not I can afford that piece of equipment that will allow me to process spelt so that I can grow the spelt, dehull the spelt, and sell the spelt all from the farm. Continuing that along, as long as there's more of you who want what it is I have, then that makes it easier for me to have the capital to invest in the infrastructure to do it myself.
And we have, that was part of the intention of doing a whole week of grains promotion at Greenmarket, was to broaden the conversation, that it's not just about wheat and flour, and that there are all these whole grains that we're seeing. And in particular, emmer is being grown very well in the Northeast, and Tor is a big...
Stuck with a lot of it.
I think, yeah, he wants to just hand some out. He's pretty enthusiastic about emmer, which is, a lot of people would recognize as farro, but farro comes from a specific area in Italy, and we grow emmer. But all the demos we did this week at Union Square were using whole grains, because nobody's going to go out and bake at a table out at market. So we've been doing a lot of that education and promotion, and you know, just to even put it out, write it down on a sheet or put it out on the table there, like these are all the whole grains that we're seeing, and there's a recipe booklet there, different ways that you can use these as whole grain recipes. So we're trying to build those markets, but again, then the bottleneck does become the infrastructure, where if again, Tor's still, does he have to go up to Claus's to get his emmer dehulled? Yeah. And he's close enough. If he were a little bit further, he probably wouldn't be able to grow it.
I mean, we're talking like $1,000, $3,000 for this piece of equipment. It's like, it's not that big. This is the scale we're working at here, you know.
Painful. But it's true.
So I had a question, I don't know if it's more of a question for the miller or the grower, but the, one of the things that Nathan was talking about was how the flowers can be unpredictable, and like you guys said, that a flower grown for a few years on a different part of land could have a different protein content, I guess, than a few miles away, which is interesting. But if you wanted to get these flowers more into a commercial marketplace, what would it actually cost for you guys, or what is the process to generate a small set of technical parameters like ash content or falling number, just to give a professional baker a heads up so that you can kind of mitigate the variability before you actually have 50 kilos of flat bread to sell in your shop? Is that a really huge financial investment, or is that something, especially, I don't know, being maybe near Cornell University, is that something that you would be able to generate a small ticket on your flour to give a heads up to a commercial baker that would maybe make it a little bit easier to get that flour into that marketplace? And if there's variability, at least the bakers can then learn how to deal with a flour that has a certain protein content or a certain falling number, even if the same flour from the same producer is different seasonally or every year, then you could start to get a feel for how to work with it better.
Part of it's expense, because big mills have protein testers in-house, and they blend different batches of wheat. I mean, they're testing it
As it goes in.
as it's going in. We take a sample at harvest, send it out west, get one result back, and assume that that's going to be roughly what it is for the entire year's harvest. This is what I want to learn and get better at. How can we get? I mean, part of it's, I'm still getting good enough at milling so that the results are the same every time. So if I say I'm going to mill with X process, I will get X ash content. But yeah, we got to figure out ways to at least know what kind of ash content we're sending out.
Is that do you know what the equipment is that to find out those numbers? I mean, is it expensive equipment? Is the process complicated to get those numbers? It's not simple lab testing that can be done on site with minimal equipment. That's a question. I don't know. I don't know.
I don't either. I guess that's part of the problem. I've actually had my grains tested and have sent my grains to 3 different places and got 3 different results.
By how much?
Enough that it's annoying. So you heard what he said, and so I'll take a completely opposite tack. I'm now growing 2 kinds of hard wheat. One's a winter hard and one's a spring hard. And so my first crop of growing this winter hard wheat, I've been doing it now for 3 years. This is the first year that I opened it up for my customers to use. And I did give some of my customers a bag of this grain and let them mill it up and ask them, what's your result? How does it work? What's different about it? So far, that seems to be a better angle than getting it tested. How does it perform? How is it different? What characteristics does it have as opposed to what I brought you the last time? How would you envision blending my hard soft and my hard soft winter with my hard winter with my hard spring? Now, in what degree, how much of one mixed with how much of the other would give you something to an advantage? You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So for me, that's how I've kind of approached it, is to not go with the testing, since the testing really hasn't offered me an awful lot. Mm-hmm. But instead to give people a chance to use it and to compare with other people who want to use it. So now I have this first person who had a chance to use it, and I let them talk to the next person who's going to use it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I understand that that's not sophisticated. I understand that it's not going to make a big commercial bakery happy, but I'm not really interested in going in that direction.
Okay.
And the experience that I have with, when I was in Mexico, I worked at a place that was doing this testing, and it was lab work, and it took, you start out with a 5-pound bag or so, and you split it up for the various tests, and depending what you're looking for, ash content, you literally burn the flour and see how much you get left over. For strength, you make a putty out of some of it and test it just for sort of tensile strength. For other portions, it's taking out chemicals and lots of pipettes and this and that. So it's something where, with economies of scale, if you have a big place that's always going, you can make it real cheap. But if you're doing it individually, it's rather expensive. And more importantly, there is a disincentive for the people who know how to do it real cheap, big scale, to make it easier for the little guy to do it. Because then they have competition, and they have not just competition that there's another player on the field, but there's someone who's potentially sort of undermining their entire philosophy of bigger is better, homogeneous is better, and instead introducing this alternative narrative of what flour can taste like.
And those are things that you guys all know Elizabeth Tick, who's worked with the Northeast Organic Wheat Project, and I think that there's a place for us as support players to work on those things for the growers, because it's another specialization, and hopefully we'll get there. And I look to Vermont, where they are like their university. It's a much smaller state, to be first of all, so, and they probably aren't as devastated as New York State is in terms of allocating funds for agriculture, but they are setting those resources up, and so we'll look to them as a model, and then try to find the best place to house some sort of facility like that. But yeah, and then that's sort of the technical end of it, but then as Alton's referring to, just the communications end, to keep bringing bakers, growers, and millers together to have conversations about what happens when you work with.
What do you want to do?
Yeah.
What do you want to have? How can I help you change to make it better?
Because there's a good chance that even if you did have the exact tests done,
Right.
that it would mean nothing to the small scale guys that you're selling to, and those bakers say, oh, well, why did you spend $100, $1,000 getting these tests done when you can just give me a bag of it and I'll play with it?
Okay. I think so. We have time for one more question.
I can give it to someone else because I've already asked one if there's more questions.
Anybody have a burning question?
I had two, but I guess I'll go with one. I guess. Oh dang, it's hard to choose. Do both of them. Okay, so both at the same time. I guess the question I'll choose is, I feel like there's kind of a gap in terms of we're doing all this great stuff now, and a lot of our elders in the past were doing really kind of similar things, like you said. A while ago, there's kind of a gap in the middle of, there's like our grandfathers weren't necessarily doing it, or our fathers weren't doing this. So is there anywhere, are you getting any knowledge from elders at anywhere in this point? I'd like to know about that.
I just wanted to know, what are you, bakers? All of you are bakers, or growers of
Farmer,
wheat?
miller, baker, expert.
Okay, thank you.
There is, certainly not all of this knowledge was lost. There are plenty of old people still around who remember how to do things back the way they used to do things. Along with that sort of stored knowledge in folks who sort of have experience in the past, there are people who are totally reinventing it. There are people who never lost it. We industrialized the American food system pretty heavily, so that by the 1950s and 60s, we had a very intentionally industrial agricultural food system, but lots of other countries kept things, and very intentionally so. That was one of the things I was exploring in France, is that the American subsidy system is very much towards just having agriculture. We don't care how big it is, we don't care the values, we just want to grow some food. The French system is very much, we want to have an agricultural system, but we also value the quirkiness of the French environment. and that we're going to subsidize things that aren't necessarily efficient and aren't necessarily necessary, but we value having this one crazy cheese, so we're going to have this one crazy cheese. And they do, and the French government pours money into this one crazy cheese, just so the couple people who like it can have it. So sort of taking advantage of that, of just dialogue. These things are coming back, or coming back for the first time.
Well, I think that that's also the power of what we can leverage and access here in New York City to sort of keep pushing on that and creating that, is that, you know, we do have an incredible marketplace here, where people generally have more income available, they're willing to spend it on food, they're interested in food, they want to explore it, and so that's a place that we can keep developing these.
So I want to go to your question and say that there are a lot of things that I got out of the books that my grandfather gave me. Just going back to those books and rereading them brought out a lot. The next thing that happened was I picked up a customer at Phillipsburg Manor in Sleepy Hollow, New York, which is just north of the Tappan Zee Bridge. There's a functioning water-driven mill there, and they recreate the Rockefeller estate or the manor or the mill as it was a long time ago. And they actually have a library of how much wheat was brought in during the month of September in such and such a year. And when I got a hold of that, it was kind of hard to go through because they don't talk about wheat, they talk about corn. And there are a lot of different vocabulary things that I still don't have worked out. But I'm sure that there's a lot of knowledge left laying around that, like most things, we just tend to ignore. And if we were to just go back and look at some of that knowledge again, I'm sure we could get a lot out of it.
And from what I understand, that corn was a Dutch word for grain, and that's it. Maize has been called corn because that was the grain that the Native Americans were growing. But it refers to wheat when you get CPO sells Frika down here. Klaus makes a Frika, which Klaus always describes as Grünkorn. He's a German background, and so his wheat is. And when I did some homework on what that was, it's a wheat, but it's called corn. So that's how we got that term. So if those were logs that were kept when the Dutch were here, that would make sense. They were probably talking about whatever grain that they were producing at that time.
And one of the big troubles in general with sort of the academic study of food is that a lot of things change, and most people weren't studying this until the past 10 or 20 years. So a lot of stuff was taken for granted, but nobody sat down and wrote down, when I say corn, what I really mean is, they said, oh, this is corn. Like, this is corn. Everyone knows what you mean when you say corn, because it's what we eat every day.
I want to thank our panelists. First of all, it's been extremely interesting. Thank you for Greenmarket for organizing this, and we have some material, and thank you to everybody for coming and participating in the discussion. If you want, you can leave us your email, and we can get in touch with you with future events. Good night. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for hosting us.